NVIDIA does have that global presence, but really to serve all of its worldwide global clients, it has to rely on these GSIs and VARs who have even more global scale for the integration of their systems.
Welcome to TBR Talks, decoding strategies and ecosystems of the globe's top tech firms, where we talk business model disruption in the broad technology ecosystem, from management consultancies to systems integrators, hyperscalers to independent software vendors, telecom operators to network and infrastructure vendors, and chip manufacturers to value-added resellers. We'll be answering some of the key intelligence questions we've heard from executives and business unit leaders among the leading professional IT services and telecom vendors. I'm Patrick Heffernan, Principal Analyst, and today we'll be talking about NVIDIA with Ben Carbonneau, Senior Analyst for TBR's IT Infrastructure Practice. Ben, thanks so much for taking the time. NVIDIA on everybody's mind these days. And to set the context around that, from the perspective outside of the chip space, NVIDIA is the most important player, the one everybody talks about. But who are NVIDIA's critical competitors? Who else should we be thinking about? Who does NVIDIA think about when they think about their competitive space?
All right, great. First of all, Patrick, thank you for having me. Really excited to start TBR's coverage of NVIDIA. As you said, they're really important, on top of everybody's minds, really a leader in the AI space. And kind of to your question, just breaking it down by end market, really NVIDIA's growth has been record-setting, just from a perspective within their industry as well as outside of their industry. Just all the companies on the NASDAQ, we see NVIDIA growing exponentially. And that's mainly due to their growth in the data center business, as you can imagine, with demand for data center GPUs accelerating. So with respect to their critical competitors in that space, both AMD and Intel are competitors of NVIDIA there, as they both produce data center GPUs. However, NVIDIA's first mover advantage continues to benefit the company's competitive positioning, and that's both with respect to their hardware and their software. So NVIDIA's data center GPUs hardware release cycle remains ahead of AMD's, although AMD, with respect to performance, is catching up to NVIDIA, where NVIDIA really remains extremely differentiated from both AMD and Intel is with respect to their software and the company's parallel computing platform, which they debuted in 2006. That's called NVIDIA CUDA, and built on CUDA are several first-party applications by NVIDIA, as well as a lot of third-party applications that have been developed over time since the introduction of CUDA, which has really tied a lot of these companies who've developed applications on CUDA. It's really tied them close to NVIDIA and made it really difficult for them to transition to another platform. Additionally, the nascency of AMD's roughly equivalent platform, Roxy M, it has a lot less developers using the platform, and that has to do with, again, it being a little more recently introduced to the market, as well as having a real lack of documentation for the developers. So we see NVIDIA continuing to invest in its CUDA platform, bring in new CUDA libraries, SDKs, so software development kits,
right,
and other things to help their developers. Whereas AMD's kind of doing the same thing, really, I think, leveraging more acquisitions than NVIDIA is, but really NVIDIA's lead with CUDA is, I think, pretty insurmountable. Definitely in the near term and in the longer term, I believe, as well.
Did you say CUDA, they launched it in 2006?
Yeah, it was launched way back in 2006. So
I mean, there's first mover advantage, and there's first mover when no one else knows what's moving and that you're even in the market. So that's pretty fascinating.
That's something really interesting. I think about Jensen Huang, who's the CEO of NVIDIA. So he really had the vision of GPUs to offload some of the graphics processing workloads off CPUs, with NVIDIA bringing the first GPU to market in 1999. But Jensen also had this idea of computing done on the GPU, which is different than just the initial introduction of GPU offloading those graphics workloads. And that's really where that kind of idea came to fruition with the launch of CUDA in 2006 as their platform to enable programming. And
right. It's fascinating. I mean, I think NVIDIA really, sort of in the broader market became better known just in the last couple of years. I mean, but they really have laid that foundation for such a long time. I am curious, one of the things in the report, so again, we now have this report, a technology business research report on NVIDIA. Is it going to be semi-annual, quarterly?
It'll be a quarterly report.
Quarterly, beautiful.
Yep.
All right. In the recent one, the new one, you mentioned the CEO said that he was, and I got a quote here because it's a little bit long, but proud of the disintegrated nature of the company's supply chain, further conveying NVIDIA's strategy of swimming in its own lane and leveraging ecosystem partners for systems integration. Can you just explain a bit what you and he both mean by disintegrated nature of the supply chain? And then you implied it here how much NVIDIA actually relies on their ecosystem partners.
So yeah, I think that's really central to NVIDIA's strategy, is just being really partner driven, ecosystem centric. NVIDIA, going back to that swim in its own lane writing that I have there, NVIDIA designs silicon, software, and AI optimized platforms, but the company is really heavily reliant on its partners, and especially for systems integration and integration of their components. So for example, OEMs integrate NVIDIA components into their solutions. So OEMs such as server OEMs like Dell, HP, Lenovo, they all integrate NVIDIA's components into their server offerings. We see CSPs and colocation providers hosting NVIDIA's cloud services, like it's NVIDIA DGX Cloud. And we also see, I think this probably is more to that systems integration piece, we see global system integrators and VARs being really critical to NVIDIA's strategy, in the sense that they're responsible for assembling NVIDIA's systems in the customer's environments where they need it. So NVIDIA does have that global presence, but really to serve all of its worldwide global clients, it has to rely on these GSIs and VARs who have even more global scale for the integration of their systems.
So I want to come back to the SIs and I want to come back to the global characteristic of NVIDIA, but everything you just said made me wonder, is this been, and I guess I'm still fixated on CUDA coming out in 2006. Has this strategy of relying on the ecosystem, that's been there throughout? This isn't a shift in strategy. It's always been their play to say, we're going to produce something excellent and we're going to rely on other people to do the integration?
Yep, that's always been their play. And I think it's something that you see more in the semiconductor space than, say, you would in other hardware markets.
Yeah, because I just think there are other players out there that definitely try and swim in other people's lanes as much as their own. So I wanted, you mentioned global, and there's one thing when I think about what's been going on with NVIDIA over the last couple of years, and they are, as we just said, they manufacture a product. They're super good at manufacturing a high quality product and letting other people sell it. And so it's used by everybody, it's usable everywhere, but they have had to develop some very country specific strategies, even country specific partnerships based on everything that's been happening around, in particular generative AI and particularly the use of AI. Can you imagine, just sort of thinking ahead a couple of years, where the pressures that they've been under from different governments, from probably from some of their ecosystem partners as well, could you imagine them sort of, if not fracturing wholly into an NVIDIA in Asia and an NVIDIA in Europe and an NVIDIA in North America, at least from an organizational perspective, really becoming different companies operating under one NVIDIA umbrella, but really developing and selling and going to market and partnering in very country-specific ways?
So that's a really excellent question. I think it really hits on what we've been hearing going on with the United States export restrictions on China, specifically around semiconductor technology. I think early on, the first round of these export restrictions on semiconductor equipment and advanced semiconductors was in October of 2022. And NVIDIA quickly came to market with 2 chips that complied with these US trade restrictions. So I see this mostly happening maybe less so for that kind of NVIDIA Europe kind of thought, and more specifically for the Chinese market, because a year later, after the initial semiconductor sanctions in October 2022, in October 2023, the United States tightened the sanctions because it saw some loopholes probably related to those NVIDIA chips that were quickly developed. And then several months later, in I believe January 2024, NVIDIA announced that it had a new set, this time of 3 AI processors specific for the China market that were compliant with the United States export restrictions. So we see this continual investment in R&D to support the Chinese market. And I think that's something that we'll continue to see, as I don't see sanctions stopping between the US and China.
No, that seems unlikely. And that's, you brought up R&D. I mean, their R&D spend is tremendous. I don't remember what the numbers were, but I looked at the report this morning, and when I think about what others spend on R&D, I think that they, as a percentage of sales, as a percentage of however you want to calculate it, it's one of the highest, right?
It is very high, yep. But luckily, their revenue's been growing so fast that even with a double-digit increase in OpEx, you still see the op margin going up.
Right. I suppose if your growth is well over 100%, then you can continue to invest in R&D. Another question to me, wrap up on the services component and the IT services, professional services, even the consulting component. So we get a lot of questions from those companies about how to be better ecosystem partners across the board with the cloud and software vendors and the other OEMs. But when you think about NVIDIA, like how would a IT services company or a management consultancy, how would they get NVIDIA's attention? How would they sell with or sell through NVIDIA? What is it that they would bring to the table that NVIDIA needs?
I think they really bring the deep relationships with the customers, their customer base. We know that NVIDIA is really open to partnering. It partners with a variety of different industry players, but really I think offering complementary services around NVIDIA's portfolio of hardware and software, such as advisory and consulting services around AI strategy and solutions. That's something we've seen as being pretty big, as well as, again, systems integration. I think I heard on a recent earnings call, maybe it was Dell, that with these AI systems being implemented, especially as enterprise demand begins to increase behind AI, all this networking of these systems and networking all these AI servers together has made integration a real pain point for customers. So we're seeing not just those SIs working on that kind of systems integration, but I think another trend that I see is also infrastructure OEMs kind of broadening their reach with systems integration, trying to make that a more critical piece of their business, even from a margin perspective.
Yeah. So we saw with the hyperscalers in particular that as their reach within clients expanded and more companies were returning to AWS, Google, and Microsoft, just for example, that they then developed their own professional services, IT services capabilities. They didn't do it at the same scale as an Accenture or a Deloitte or TCS, but they recognized the need to have their own professional services arm for that sort of that last mile, that extreme expertise. Do you see NVIDIA developing a similar professional services or services capability, or will they continue to follow their strategy of stay in their own lane, do what they do really well, and let others do the integration?
So for the time being, I don't see NVIDIA doing that. They've been really vocal on relying on their partner ecosystem, and I continue to see the company kind of upgrading its its NPN, so NVIDIA Partner Network. We see new competencies being brought by NVIDIA to validate different partners' expertise around certain technologies. So I think those programs will continue to be invested in, but really I think NVIDIA will continue investing in its partners rather than trying to develop those services on its own. However, right now, revenue's increasing like crazy, margins are increasing like crazy. So, several years down the road, when that kind of starts flattening out and maybe margins start contracting, will they maybe look to deliver more services? I could see that potentially happening, but that's kind of something maybe decades out.
Right. Well, decades. Now. Okay, decades. All right, excellent. One last question I have to ask, because the last time we were on the road together, we went to Austin, Texas. We had some of the best barbecue I've ever had in my life. Have you, since that trip, had barbecue as good? And if so, where was it?
I have not. I've had barbecue a few times, mostly just backyard kind of stuff. I'll tell my family that it tastes pretty good, but in the back of my head, it can never compare to Franklin.
Well, I hope your family, not all of your family, listens to this podcast, but they'll find out that you've been lying to them. So, Ben, thank you so much for coming in. Really appreciate it. And we will probably need to do this again in a quarter because everyone's asking questions about NVIDIA and there's a lot going on. So thank you so much.
Oh, I'd love to. Thanks, Patrick.
Excellent. Next week, I'll be speaking with TBR's 3 newest research analysts about working at TBR and their expectations for technology over the next 10 years. Don't forget to send us your key intelligence questions on business strategy, ecosystems, and management consulting through the form in the show notes below. Visit tbri.com to learn how we help tech companies large and small answer these questions with the research, data, and analysis my guests bring to this conversation every week. Once again, I'm your host, Patrick Heffernan, Principal Analyst at TBR. Thanks for joining us, and see you next week.